All right. Welcome to Rising with the Tide.
Hello, hello.
Another day, another live stream, another show. Um, we're super excited today to welcome Alleen Brown, a New York-based reporter for The Intercept. She has words published in The Nation, Yes Magazine, The Intercept, as we mentioned, and various other publications. Her series Policing the Pipeline, which is 17 parts, I think, so far. And her other series, Oil and Water, have particularly caught my attention. But in total, I've tried to count, and this is an estimate. We have around 200 articles they've written for The Intercept.
Wow, I didn't know.
At first, I was like, I'll just count them because I don't really know how else to see the number. So I just started, and after a while, I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit much. You've done so much work for them, and I gotta say, big props to you. I mean, Intercept is like one of the publications I think, the most respect for, and I know a lot of people around me really respect their work as well, so including yours, obviously. So yeah, thank you for what you do, and thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it's nice of you to give us a bit of your time. So maybe we can start with a little bit of your own background as a journalist, as a reporter, as an investigative reporter. Maybe kind of how you got into this business, this line of work, and I don't know what motivated you, I guess, to enter this kind of world.
I mean, I guess I've always been a curious person, and I've always enjoyed writing and been good at it. So when I went to college, I got a journalism degree. At that point, I wasn't fully committed to pursuing journalism. I think I was never very interested in sort of newspaper reporting that really adhered to ideas about objectivity that I was not quite aligned with. There were a lot of people at my university, for example, who said that they didn't even vote because they needed to protect their objectivity. And it just seemed a little bit false to me. I mean, obviously, I'm interested in hearing all sides of a situation and understanding the different interests that everyone is driven by. But I wasn't really excited by the culture that I saw in journalism school. So for a while after I graduated, I was doing a lot of different things, kind of interested in community organizing for a while, but honestly, I wasn't that great at it. Whenever I pursued journalism things, they went well. Did some internships and ultimately kind of kept looking for where my skills I thought could be the most impactful, and investigative journalism ended up being what that seemed to be. So yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. And how exactly did you find yourself kind of working with, I guess, would you say you work mainly for The Intercept?
Yep. I'm full-time at The Intercept and have been almost since the beginning. I was working for a community publication in Minneapolis, where I'm from, for a while. And then again, didn't see a lot of journalism opportunities in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And a lot of the kind of magazine style reporting that I was seeing, investigative journalism, was based in New York. So I did an internship at The Nation magazine, where there was some work that I appreciated being published. And then out of that internship is mostly fact checking. So
Okay.
I was doing fact checking and research for a lot of different people for about a year after that. And it just happened that one of the people that I was talking to about getting gigs knew the the first executive editor at the Intercept as they were launching. And so I started fact checking the first pieces that the Intercept launched with, kind of always with the idea that I tried to be pretty vocal about, that I wanted to be reporting, and was particularly interested in reporting about climate issues. I'd done some fact checking for Naomi Klein's climate change book, This Changes Everything.
Yeah.
And so really felt that that was an area that needed a lot more reporting. And, I think now there's a lot of really great climate reporters doing good work, and a lot of journalistic organizations really investing in that. But at that time, there just wasn't, you didn't see the urgency in media that we're starting to see now. So it felt important to me that the Intercept really invest in climate and environmental reporting.
Yeah. So were those, I guess, the Glenn Greenwald days of the Intercept?
Yeah.
Has I obviously, this is stuff that I don't think we want to stay on for too long, but I do feel like I have to ask because it is a publication that, I guess I care about in whatever sense that means. But what do they call it? Like a parasocial relationship with the Intercept as a publication. But have things changed? I mean, I guess I don't know how much you can really say about it, but what I wonder is really how the Intercept has evolved a little bit through time, and whether these kind of bigger changes have impacted you as a worker there, or have impacted how you feel about the work that the Intercept does.
I mean, I think the Intercept has certainly evolved over the years that it's been around. The vision at the very beginning was quite different than where we've landed. They were talking about having all these different outlets that were sort of working together, and maybe we would even cover sports. And, it was just this really kind of sprawling idea. And now the focus is much, I think, more clear. And I mean, Glenn's departure hasn't impacted my work. I think I've always, I don't see a change in the Intercept's investment in investigative reporting. I think Glenn's work and, maybe some of the other work that the earlier work that the Intercept was publishing at times had more of like an opinionated voice. I think that there's still a lot of room for that at the Intercept, but maybe there's been a little bit of a more of a focus on reporting that's rooted in investigation. And again, I mean, even Glenn's work has that element to it, but I think right now what I hear from my editors is that we want to do work that nobody else is doing, and really focus on reporting and uncovering important details about the world that aren't out there. So I find that I definitely still get to do that. And I think our environmental reporting, I see more investment there. My colleague Sharon Lerner is also doing really great investigative work around toxic chemicals and all kinds of environmental issues. So we also have Naomi Klein as a correspondent.
Right.
And so I don't think Glenn's departure has changed much for me, and I'm still pretty excited about what I get to do there.
Yeah, Naomi Klein's book, I think the shock doctrine one was really one of the most transformative moments for me personally. As I finished it, I just had this big whoa kind of moment.
Yeah, totally. And I think that wasn't, I guess you don't really think of that as a climate book necessarily, but it really is. And, it really has, shaped my thinking about a lot of this stuff. So
yeah. And I guess it shows very much the more insidious aspects of climate conflicts or climate adjacent conflicts.
Mhm.
And I feel like, um, you know, to segue, this is something that you as well have done quite well with, especially your series on policing the pipeline, which, I've read, I think most of them, if not all of them, and it's really fantastic stuff. I landed on it personally while I was just doing research for my thesis, but I think this is something that, you know, everyone stands to benefit from reading, because I mean, we'll get into it, the details, but there are universal lessons, I think, to be learned from this specific conflict. So maybe we can just start with the beginning of policing the pipeline, which starts with an interview with a certain Oxendine Molliver, a state
Mhm.
employee. Can you maybe tell us about what happened to Oxendine? I hope I'm saying her name right.
Yeah, so I think you are, but I
Okay.
would have to ask her again. It's been a while. So Danielle was this tribal liaison brought on by Minnesota's Department of Commerce. I believe she's Ojibwe. And, her job was to be this go-between as Minnesota decided whether and how it was going to allow this Canadian corporation, Enbridge, to build this massive tar sands oil pipeline. And so this is line 3. Line 3 existed prior to the completion of this construction project this year. However, what Enbridge was trying to do at the time that Danielle was working was basically massively expand it and reroute it. So the pipeline is now in operation, and I believe it has about double the capacity that it did before, and it takes a new route through Minnesota, and it's basically connecting this tar sands oil region of Canada with this, I guess, transport center in Wisconsin, where it goes on to all kinds of other places and is refined. So anyway, Minnesota was deciding the old line 3 was like corroded and something needed to be done about it. One option, of course, could be to shut it down, but the route that Enbridge was seeking was to build a new pipeline that was much bigger. Or that had more capacity. So Danielle was, what she anticipated doing was to be like going to these public hearings, listening to what community members had to say about this project, developing relationships with the various tribes that have land rights along the pipeline's path. But at the beginning of this round of hearings, one of her superiors at the Commerce Department called to let her know that instead of being, stationed at this table to field questions about the pipeline's impact on tribes, she was going to be directing guests to the cookies and coffee. So she'd be like a greeter, which is not what she saw her job as.
Yeah.
And, basically what she found out, what she was told by her bosses, is that Enbridge found a video of her at another meeting, and they went to the governor's office and said that they were worried that she was too sympathetic to people who oppose the pipeline, and her being, in this central position for the state might provoke more resistance. So they're like, yeah, we want you there, but you're just going to greet people. So ultimately she resigned. That was part of it, but also she felt that some of the comments that people were submitting, raising concern, that tribal members were submitting, raising concerns about the pipeline, were not really being taken into account in a serious way, and she stepped out of that role. So I think this showed very early on the sway that Enbridge had in the permitting process and in the decision-making process for the pipeline before construction had even begun. And we saw that develop and become stronger or, similar throughout the rest of the project's development.
I'd just like to ask, so obviously there has been wrongdoing here because the local people weren't really their views weren't being taken seriously. But I'd like to know, sort of, in terms of land rights and sort of community rights based around that region, because many of our listeners probably won't know the specifics of, I guess in this case, American law. Are there sort of codified, clear land rights, and if there are those, were those being directly violated, or was it sort of a more kind of vague warping, like sort of what was going on in a legal sense here?
Sure. So there's a lot going on there. So the land that is now Minnesota was previously occupied by the Dakota people, as well as Anishinaabe people, who are often referred to as Ojibwe in Minnesota. Now, today, the Ojibwe people have legal rights to land in northern Minnesota where the pipeline passes. Those are connected to, I think, a few different treaties, and different land kind of has different status. So where the pipeline passes, there are two reservations where two different tribes have a set of specific rights that the old pipeline passed through. And there was a lot of politicking that went around there because the tribes have to agree to allow the company to build their pipeline through the area or through those reservations. One tribe said, yeah, your old crusty pipeline is here, but we don't want you to build a new one. You can't come through our reservation again, and you need to take the pipeline out. So that was Leech Lake, the Leech Lake Reservation. And again, that's an Ojibwe tribe. And then, or it might be a band, I'm not totally sure. But, and then the other reservation was the Fond du Lac Reservation. And they ultimately, initially they were opposed to the pipeline, but ultimately came around. And, I think on a lot of these reservations and a lot of these communities, there's a real tension around what to do with these pipelines. This is playing out now, or has also played out in Wisconsin with another Enbridge project called Line 5, where this easement is up for renewal, and they can say, no, get your pipeline out of here. But if they do that, the chances are, or there's a decent chance that the pipeline will, or the company will find a way to just reroute the thing. So, people have connections and like relationships with the land beyond just the borders of the reservation. And they're like, well, is this really, serving us or the land if they're just gonna like dig a new trench and put this harmful thing through like land that doesn't have a tar sands oil pipeline in it right now. And at the same time, there are a lot of resources that companies like Enbridge pour into these communities to pressure them to agree to build a pipeline. And, a lot of resources tend to be offered. And in some cases, these are communities that really are, may have some poverty in the community, like may really, need resources to do the things that they, to support their people. So Fond du Lac ultimately signed some kind of settlement with Enbridge and allowed the pipeline to be built there. And, we learned that we don't know the details of the settlement, but we know, for example, that people on Fond du Lac get, or tribal members on Fond du Lac get this like per capita distribution that comes from, I think it usually comes from like the tribe's businesses. But I think it was, I don't know if it was 2020 or 2021, people were getting these notices being like, oh, this per capita distribution is coming from Enbridge. And I think it was something like, I shouldn't say the total because I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it was pretty significant and impacted all these households. And so this caused tension because not everybody in the community was on board for that decision or comfortable with the amount of oil money now pouring into their community. So the other part of this is this big chunk of land that's kind of in between the reservations, which is also treaty land, but it's land where a number of different tribes have rights to, I want to say it's hunt, gather, travel. And so there was a big legal fight put up around the pipeline passing through that land. And I think 3 different tribes, if I'm not mistaken, got involved in this legal fight, saying that they weren't properly consulted on the pipeline's construction through that land, and they've argued a number of different things, including that their this land will be like damaged by the pipeline, sacred sites are being disrupted, resources or aspects of the land that are really, really central to people's identity will be destroyed, and that's really destructive to the people themselves. So so that kind of like treaty land that's not part of reservations is one place where people were really putting up a legal fight, and I think there may still be an ongoing legal fight. So I think there's probably some other stuff, but
oh, thank you, that's quite informative. Can you tell us a little bit about the terms that Enbridge agreed to build the pipeline? Because I guess putting aside whether or not we think they were right, the terms, I'm kind of also curious whether they even stuck to the terms that they were given. And of course, I also do want to talk about whether those terms were right to be given at all. But I find it quite interesting to see if, because I've heard and I've read, I guess, also from you that they may not have stuck to all of the conditions that were agreed upon.
Yeah. So the condition that I really honed in on in this series was kind of a novel one. In this agreement that Enbridge signed with the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, it was basically like a set of conditions that they had to agree on to build their pipeline. There was this clause that said that the company should not use counterinsurgency tactics or misinformation campaigns. And so that counterinsurgency bit, it's not defined in the permit.
Right.
We know based on, I guess to take a step back, I think to understand that counterinsurgency part, you have to go back to Standing Rock and the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota, which is next to Minnesota. It's a state neighboring Minnesota. And so at Standing Rock, thousands of people showed up at the edge of this reservation where this other pipeline was being built, the Dakota Access Pipeline. And the movement was Indigenous led, really centered on the Standing Rock tribe's concerns about the pipeline's impact to their water source. Part of the pipeline company Energy Transfer's response to this Indigenous-led movement was to send in this private security company called Tiger Swan that had its roots in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Tiger Swan was started by an ex-Special Forces commander, and a lot of the people there were, or a lot of the security guys were ex-military, ex-Special Forces, and really like brought that lens into the response to the Standing Rock movement.
The nuance of special forces.
Right. So the Intercept learned and was able to kind of expose some of these tactics via this big leak of internal reports that Tiger Swan was sending to Energy Transfer, describing exactly what they were doing on the ground. And, we built off of that. My colleague, Will Parrish, also had a bunch of public records requests that kind of affirmed some of what the internal documents showed. And, I was able to interview some folks, and that was this other series, Oil and Water, that we did. But one of the things in the internal reports, they made clear and very explicit that they were viewing the Standing Rock movement as an insurgency and responding with counterinsurgency tactics. So among those tactics, there was like aerial surveillance, communications monitoring, and there was also infiltration where security members were kind of pretending to be water protectors, which are what people who oppose that pipeline and Line 3 call themselves, and like making friends with people, trying to infiltrate, control the situation in various ways. And so when you flash to Line 3, this, if you listen to some of the hearings that led up to this permit that includes the counterinsurgency language, one of the commissioners talks about, like, he doesn't want to see what he saw at Standing Rock. He doesn't want to see this Pinkerton stuff. Pinkerton is another private security company that used infiltration to crack down on the labor movement in the US. And I think ultimately had faced some legal repercussions for that. So he seemed to be worried about like infiltration. However, if you actually look at what counterinsurgency is and means to the US government and around the world, it is not just infiltration. It's not just like intelligence tactics, although that is an important aspect of that. And I know you guys have had Alexander Dunlap on the show, who has lots to say about this corporate counterinsurgency stuff. But, in seeing, I kind of honed in on that clause and was like, okay, well, what is this about? And are they really not using counterinsurgency tactics? And when you start to look at what counterinsurgency is, it's really helpful for understanding what happens when these resistances grow around a Line 3 pipeline or a Dakota Access pipeline. The company, I think we always want to pay a lot of attention, or it's always tempting to pay attention just to the response of law enforcement, of private security, but really there's this more overarching set of tactics that's kind of like being put upon a community as they're trying to resist a project of this scale, especially a pipeline which goes through lots of different properties, requires a lot of different people to agree, really. Or whatever, agree. So if you look
acquiesce.
Yes, yeah. So counterinsurgency tactics, I think at the heart of counterinsurgency is this idea of getting the surrounding community on board with the project and getting the surrounding community to kind of like fight the fight for to advance your agenda, like whatever outside actor
to
agenda.
win the hearts and minds, right?
Yep, hearts and minds, I think, is what we associate with counterinsurgency a lot. It's not just going in and like carpet bombing everyone. It's getting the community to be like, yes, we believe in what you believe in, and we're gonna like really fight for that. So for this Line 3 pipeline, I think I'll talk more about, at the center, what I think that really exemplifies like a counterinsurgency tactic is the way that the company sort of collaborated with law enforcement and got law enforcement to take care of a lot of what private security or what Energy Transfer might have been relying on private security to do. In a lot of counterinsurgency efforts by the US government abroad, use of training of local law enforcement and kind of like getting local law enforcement to take on a lot of this labor. That's just like a really common tactic. It's, you know, in at least one version of a counterinsurgency manual that the US government uses. So there's that. Enbridge was certainly doing that, but there's also like, yeah, going into these communities and donating to build community centers or, you know, advance these programs that are supportive of the community, like offering a lot of jobs.
So there are these like soft and hard kind of techniques, would you say? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's really a combination of both.
Okay. And there's some like shady stuff around the escrow account as well happening.
Yeah. So that's really, I think, central, another kind of center thing that I focused on in this policing the pipeline movement is this public safety escrow account, which was also something that was in the Public Utilities Commission permit that we're talking about that had the anti-counterinsurgency language. So it was kind of like contradictory in and of itself. And this, you know, this account was created so that basically Enbridge would put money in and a, you know, worker for the state of Minnesota would distribute it to, I guess, public safety agencies that were dealing with the repercussions of the pipeline. So, you know, a law enforcement agency, for example, would send in an invoice. This state worker would approve or deny it, and then Enbridge would reimburse whatever agency it is. And so, you know, there was, the thing was set up in part to pay for, I guess, drug and human trafficking costs associated with the pipeline. And that's because a lot of people in these hearings were concerned about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and what it would mean for this influx of temporary workers to come into the state of Minnesota. But I would say most of the funding was going to law enforcement. So these tiny local sheriff's agencies all along the route. At this point, I need to like spend some time with the latest invoices, but I think so far between 4 and 6 million has been invoiced to the account. You know, again, distributed throughout a bunch of different agencies. That's not the end of it. You know, they're still submitting their invoices. So we don't know what the total will be. But, you know, this account, again, was a response to Standing Rock. At the end, the public officials in Minnesota were really concerned about what happened there, really wanted to avoid what happened there. And one of the things they wanted to avoid was this big bill that public agencies were left with in North Dakota at the end, you know, once Energy Transfer was done with construction. So again, I shouldn't quote numbers, but I don't know them off the top of my head. But
or you can give us ballpark figures. I mean,
I can like look it up while we're talking.
But it's no small amount. Especially for a little like police department in Minnesota, it's nothing small.
Yeah, and so North Dakota, the final bill, you know, distributed across a bunch of different agencies was $38 million. And wow. I think that Energy Transfer ended up paying all or most of that, but that wasn't the arrangement in advance. And again, the Minnesota didn't want to be stuck with those kinds of costs. So we don't know exactly where the idea for this account came from, but it kind of solved that problem. It said, you know what, like this is going to happen, and clearly people are going to resist the project, but that's not going to be you guys aren't going to have to pay for it. Enbridge will cover it. And it's not, this isn't the first time something like this appeared after Standing Rock. There was another pipeline that was going to be built through the upper Midwest, including South Dakota. This is the Keystone XL pipeline.
Yeah.
And it's another tar sands oil pipeline that people had been resisting for years. Another movement that was very indigenous led, especially in South Dakota. It's the same region as the Dakota Access Pipeline, some of the same tribes involved, and tribes with like a very strong history of resisting the US government. Like the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota people have really put up a strong resistance to the US government up until the late 1800s and since then. So South Dakota was worried about the same issue, and they passed legislation that set up an account that would have covered Keystone XL policing costs. Ultimately, that project was canceled after President Biden came into office and said no to this key border crossing permit. He did not intervene with Line 3, as we know.
Yeah.
Again, the similar kind of idea of an account popped up in Minnesota. We don't know exactly who's trafficking this idea. So it's in the permit. This account is set up, and as the pipeline begins to be built, resistance grows as we expected, and law enforcement is responding, anticipating that Enbridge is going to foot the bill. So I think that certainly has implications when we think of about what might have happened if there wasn't any guarantee that Enbridge was going to cover costs. What would have happened in the permitting process, and what would have happened as law enforcement responded, in some cases aggressively.
I mean, it just sounds already honestly insane, the idea that a private company can just pay police for anything, really. Like, I don't know, just as a concept that feels very, very strange. And yeah, there's some really like shady stuff. And also one of the things that I found kind of unreal while reading your writing was there's a helicopter that had come around for a surveillance, and if I understood it right, the police told you at first that there wasn't, and that like it wasn't true, and then a bit later said, oh, actually, yeah, it's true, but I don't know who it was.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing. I was on the ground reporting this out. I guess it was almost a year ago. It was last March. And so it was like kind of things really intensified in this resistance movement over the summer. But in March, spring was just arriving. It was just starting to I guess direct actions were starting to grow, et cetera. And surveillance by law enforcement and whoever else was also intensifying. So people were when I was there, people were having this experience of just being pulled over constantly. There was this camp that was set up that was Anishinaabe led, and a lot of people who were opposed to the pipeline were staying there. And it was just like, people were just, leaving the camp and being pulled over right away for very minor things. It's like, oh, you didn't turn your turn signal on fast enough. Like you turned it on, but it wasn't fast enough. And, just like very minor things.
Just so that their info could be taken.
Yeah, right. That was what people suspected. And, again, it's something that takes quite a lot of law enforcement resources to have somebody, in the small rural county, keeping such a close eye on things. So I think that's that account connection. or, that's where some concerns about the account come from, is the intensity of law enforcement's response. But in this case, I was visiting, there were some folks locked down to a pipeline site. I think they were doing construction. I'm not sure exactly, but so people had locked down. Law enforcement was there to detach them. And I was interviewing one of the people who was there to resist the project. This person named Big Wind, who is Arapaho, was also involved with Standing Rock. And they were telling me about this Department of Homeland Security helicopter that had flown over their camp. And this local sheriff, Sheriff Gaida, who I got to talk to quite a bit actually, walked over and kind of interrupted and was like, no, there's no helicopter, there's no DHS. What you're saying is not true. You can't be telling lies. And Big Wind was really upset because it's like they saw this, it happened, and you've got this official kind of coming in and saying like, this isn't reality. What you're saying is not reality. Of course, a few days later, I got a phone call from Sheriff Gaida, leaving a voicemail to say, oh, I was in this meeting and I didn't know there was a helicopter, but it turns out there was a DHS helicopter. And
did he actually apologize? Did he say sorry about that?
I think he did apologize.
Okay.
Like Sheriff Gaida does I appreciate that Sheriff Gaida likes to talk, and he in this case apologized. But I don't know, I thought it was really revealing in that it wasn't the first time that, one thing that also had that sense of like unreality was a lot of law enforcement officers or sheriffs that I talked to, and other people would say, there is no Enbridge account. You keep talking about an Enbridge account. There's no Enbridge money. It's not an Enbridge account. It's a state of Minnesota account. The state of Minnesota created that account. And it's a state of Minnesota official who's approving these invoices. So that's not an Enbridge account. And it's like, okay, like that's a real hair splitting. Sure, yes, someone else is approving the invoices, but there's no ambiguity about where that money comes from. So that was another, and I think also the other challenging thing about like showing what's happening there is that it is the multi-agency task force that was created to respond to Line 3 is called the Northern Lights Task Force. That is just public officials. So it's all these sheriff's offices along the route, as well as some like state emergency management and like other offices. They're all working together to respond to this pipeline, but there are all these separate agencies that have very specific personalities running things, and that are like communicating, but not, like Enbridge can have a relationship with one agency that is different from the relationship with another agency. And so it's not like there's one spokesperson who really can say what's happening everywhere. So Sheriff Gaida can tell me there's no DHS helicopter because he doesn't know about the DHS helicopter. I don't think he was actually lying. I think he didn't know it was there. And I think that that scenario kind of creates the possibility for untruths to proliferate without.
Would you say that that's kind of part of the counterinsurgency tactics, this kind of divide and conquer style?
Yeah, divide and conquer is certainly it's certainly a counterinsurgency tactic, and one that, beyond law enforcement certainly has played out more than anything in Indigenous communities, where the pipeline really, really needs the approval, or, it's really going to make Enbridge's life harder if a community is opposed to a project. So, And I think it goes beyond donations and settlements. I think there's real, like, intense, insidious politicking that happens with, you know, liaisons hired that are part of the community, that are, you know, and people going in and like making friends with people. You know, it's just a really kind of insidious infiltration that does create lasting divisions beyond the, or in addition to whatever pollution the pipeline itself causes. And this is something that goes way back too. It's like, you know, definitely the kind of tactic that colonizers used as they first started, you know, trying to get control of indigenous land in that state and across the US.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's kind of old stuff, but now being carried out by these corporations that are like driving this environmental and human crisis that has real implications for every single person.
Yeah, and the claims that kind of like focusing on the carrot part of the, you know, carrot and stick of the corporate counterinsurgency, the benefits that Enbridge claims the pipeline will have. Oops, sorry, just a notification for all the stream to see. All my notifications are coming through for some reason. Sorry about that. Thought it was on sleep. Yeah, for the benefits that the Enbridge is claiming will come out of this pipeline, they really, like, when I went on the website, Enbridge website, I guess it's enbridge.com or whatever it is, it's so, like, it's so surreal how close it is to all these other oil and pipeline company websites. Like, it's almost like they all have, first off, the same web editor, and then also the same like writers as well, because they all use the same terms, they all use the same like menu styles and choices of like table of contents. It's kind of scary. Like, I remember doing some of this research for the Wet'suwet'en methane pipeline, and okay, that one has a difference, which is they try to like greenify a little bit their own project by saying, "Oh, it's natural gas, isn't it? It's a natural, guys. It's greener." When really it's just cow farts. It's literally just methane. It's not that green. And the way we get it isn't green either. And yeah, and so like, I guess one of the things that sticks out most, I think, in that website and like, I guess, which is kind of part of the corporate counterinsurgency, are these claims to benefits. And again, putting aside the fact that these so-called benefits, which, you know, like, they are dwarfed by the ecological and sociocultural destruction because of the extractivism, right? Like, these claims, whatever they may be, will not make up for the destruction. We're totally, I think everyone or a lot of people agree on that. But are these claims even correct is also what I'm wondering. The claims that Enbridge makes are that about 8,600 jobs over a 2-year period in Minnesota will be filled, $2 billion boost to the Minnesota economy, with 1.5 billion of that in Enbridge spending alone. 330 million in payroll to workers, long-term property taxes, and support for the Minnesota refineries, which will continue to give reliable crude oil deliveries and provide energy savings on a per barrel basis. I'm wondering if any of your work has kind of shown you that the claims that Enbridge itself makes are maybe not as correct as they seem to be.
I mean, my work hasn't focused on many of those. I feel like I saw another reporter do something about how many jobs in Minnesota were actually being created versus jobs for people outside of the state. It's certainly Enbridge makes a really concerted effort to offer jobs to people from tribal communities who are tribal members. And they have hired, some of the economic stuff, it's like, they are making a real effort to assure that communities are dependent on Enbridge economically. And, they do have a lot of money that they throw at these communities. So, the property tax thing is not, I think that can't be ignored. And there, one piece that I did looked at, via public records request, I got this email that was from, I think it was the Aiken County. Yeah, it was the Aiken County Sheriff's Department, which is where Sheriff Gaida is from. And it was a deputy that was buying some weapons for the department. And, he sends this like gun salesman an email that says our budget took a hit last week. That's all we're going to order for now. I'm hoping the pipeline will give us an extra boost to next year's budget, which should make it easier for me to propose an upgrade or trade to your rifles rather than this rebuild of our Bushmasters. They were looking for, I think, semi-automatic weapons. So there was this idea. I mean, I think this speaks to the power that Enbridge has in these places that goes beyond the account. This law enforcement officer is expecting that the county property taxes are going to go up and that's going to end up in the sheriff's department's budget, and he's going to be able to buy more guns. So there's some incentive there. And so I talked to the Aiken County auditor. He told me that Enbridge was contributing like $68,000 to the county budget for 2021. And if the project entered operation, which now it has, he estimated that Enbridge would pay Aiken County $2.4 million annually in local school and state property taxes. In another county, Cass County, Enbridge is among the highest single property taxpayers. However, it was interesting talking to there's some funny stuff going on with Enbridge too. Like, Enbridge already has all these pipelines going through Minnesota. And recently they were fighting in court saying that they were being overcharged for property taxes and that they wanted all this money back. And a judge agreed. And so basically, as this construction was starting, all these counties were like, oh, hey, guess what? Enbridge wants you to pay back like millions of dollars. Ultimately, I think the state was like, don't worry, county, we're going to cover it. But the counties were going to see a big reduction in what they got annually from Enbridge. Now, this new pipeline with new equipment that's worth more was expected to replace some of that lost income. In Aiken County, there wasn't like a lot. It was a lot of the replacement line that was going to be going through. So it wasn't the same issue that this other county, Cass County, I spoke to, the auditor there, I think it was, or one of the county employees was telling me that Enbridge is among the highest single property taxpayers. However, the largest pool of property taxpayers is owners of lake homes and cabins who are there to like appreciate, the natural beauty of Minnesota and these like lands and waters and like aquatic life that are really going to be changed by the climate crisis and by the emissions that tar sands oil sends up into the air. So I think that I think it's true that Enbridge is pouring a lot of money into these communities. There's like definitely discrepancies in how the money is working. But I think the bigger picture is, what good is all that money going to do if we're facing the kind of outcomes of the climate crisis that we are facing, and that this particular fuel has a really special role to play in exacerbating.
Yeah, climate suicide is a profitable business, I guess.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm really interested in is I guess what some people call imaginaries, which like I guess the way that people like the stories and the myths and things that people tell themselves and believe in around kind of political topics, let's say. So I was wondering what you thought about the imaginaries of the opposing side, so to say, because you've managed to speak to a lot of people the past few years who are either kind of like actors on the other side. We'll just call them that, even though it's quite reductive, I think. But yeah, the people like trying to push this pipeline through, or allies contributing directly or indirectly to its development through like securitization or other means. And I wonder basically how they see themselves in regards to the conflict. Like, does everyone have a clean conscience? Do some people know that what they're doing is, has disastrous climate consequences? And I also wonder, I guess, in terms of like the specifically the counterinsurgency stuff, do the people, I don't know if you've managed to speak to them or if you would even speak to them about this sort of stuff, but the people who are more like doing the kind of more insidious stuff, I guess, how they view themselves and what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I am so curious about that question. And I don't know, I have ideas in some cases. I think that different people are involved and think of themselves in a lot of different ways. I think some people are maybe a little bit ambivalent and there to do a job. I think there's huge variation in how people approach this stuff. Like, we just did a story, or yeah, I'll just say that I've certainly spoken to people who have worked for oil and gas companies who want to talk because they feel like what these companies were doing was wrong. There's some people who maybe think some element of what's happening is wrong, but ultimately their ideas about oil and gas and its role in the world they're comfortable with, or more, let me think, that like I wouldn't underestimate the power of some of like the narrative fight that these companies are playing. Like,
Do you think there's just a lot of like self convincing going on?
Yeah, like I've had sheriffs tell me, I've had all kinds of people talk to me about how we rely on oil and gas and plastic to live our lives, and that's not changing anytime soon. And I've had some surprising people talk about, well, I believe in climate change, I'm worried about greenhouse gas emissions, but this transition to renewable energy isn't going to happen overnight. And Enbridge is a partner in this. Enbridge cares about this too. And,
Right.
it's going to take time. We need this fuel for now. And, these companies are doing their best. I mean, one person that particularly comes to mind was, this guy that I spoke to whose family has been really involved in environmental conservation in, I forget what county it was, but one of the counties along the pipeline route. And, this guy he's an older guy. He really thinks of himself as an environmentalist. He's really involved in the Democratic Party. So he's like probably, he's pretty liberal. And his, he's on the foundation board for this Long Lake Conservation Center that his father helped found. he had been asked at one point, he had spoken out against the pipeline, but later on, some pipeline opponents in the area asked him to sign some petition, and he said that he couldn't do it. And so I went and I asked him about it. And I mean, it turned out, of course, that Enbridge was on the foundation board also. But that didn't seem to be all that really mattered. Like, clearly Enbridge had donated some money to this foundation. I think it was in the realm of like tens of thousands of dollars. But, if you look at the organization's annual budget, it wasn't, so huge of a proportion from what I could tell from what he told me. However, what seemed more important to this individual was his relationship with this fellow board member, who is also a key kind of tribal liaison person for Enbridge. And so, he's telling me, well, I had my concerns too, but then I met Paul, and, Paul is a good guy. Like, Paul cares about renewable energy. That's his background. And like, Paul goes to the Boundary Waters, this like canoeing wilderness area in Minnesota, with his kids. Like, Paul is a good person. Paul is my friend. And, I think that really helped guide his thinking about this pipeline. And so I think that having these Enbridge people come into communities and build real relationships with people, and speak to them where they're at. It's also rural northern Minnesota. It's a lot of these community members have families who were involved in like mining or other extractive industries, who sort of like relate to pipeline workers coming in and like digging up their yard, like in a way that they don't necessarily relate to people that would put their bodies on the line to stop a destructive project. So I think that Enbridge is very well attuned to the culture of the communities that it is going into. I mean, obviously not always well attuned enough, because a lot of communities have been like, no, man.
But in some way, that's the most insidious part so far that I've heard. Like almost creating friendships and relationships. I mean, it instantly reminded me of I don't know if you've seen that pretty recent show, Dope Sick, about the opioid crisis with OxyContin. And I mean, it's basically a similar strategy the pharma company of Purdue Pharma used in promoting OxyContin with sales reps, and which, I mean, every pharma company still does with their medicine, which is to send a nice buddy friend person to your local doctor and be like, hey doc, you like you like the Jets, let's go watch a game, and I've got tickets, or let's go to this really nice restaurant you like. And yeah, I for me, those interpersonal, like, I don't know, it might sound naive or small in the like greater impact that on the climate, on the culture, on the people, but personally I feel like that is one of the more treacherous things that a company can do, is like break that sanctity of interpersonal relations and like organic like friendships and relations. Obviously it is dwarfed by the total annihilation of the planet and its cultures, but in the scale of things, it is still like, it still feels very wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
And one of the things that really surprises me every time I go on the websites of these companies is how much effort they put into to make themselves seem like they are already accepted by Indigenous communities whenever there are conflicts with Indigenous communities regarding these topics. And like the same thing with the CGL Coastal GasLink pipeline with the TC Energy. Like, you go on the website and almost top of the list is our relationship with Indigenous people and First Nations. And it's like, they instantly use pictures of indigenous people who have been basically co-opted by the company to like serve the company's purposes. But I feel like there's a lot of nuance in those like bits that a lot of the time we don't actually get to talk about, because I was just reading a paper today from I think it was from Verweyen and Dunlap, that was talking about how, or mentioning that these conflicts aren't just between the company and the community, they're also conflicts that seep into the community and tear that community apart, where it creates a conflict between the community and the community. Like it's not just outsider versus insider. And when I was watching some of the videos as well that TC Energy for the CGL pipeline was putting out, it's really strange how like some indigenous people would come on camera to like show that they live on indigenous land and like on protected land. They have indigenous practices of doing things like I saw a video of a woman who was collecting berries to make like, I think, some sort of food product like her ancestors have done. And she was really like speaking all about, her ancestors and her connection to the land and all these things. And then like kind of adorning a kind of cap of TC Energy and being like, and that's why I support the pipeline, because it will give us more opportunity and money we desperately need. And in some ways, of course, those communities are the most marginalized in Canada. At least the Indigenous First Nations are the poorest. They're the unfortunately like the ones that have the least access to education, to basic resources like water, for example, even. So I don't know, I guess, how do you reconcile this kind of dissonance between the locals or indigenous people who want to collaborate with those companies in a sense because they feel like often like there's no other choice, like a lot of them have heard from their elders that you cannot win against the white man's company, you will just lose, so you might as well get the best deal you can get. And others may see it not just as a necessity but as a good thing because it will bring these much needed resources to the community. How do you deal, I guess, with that kind of conflict within those communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a good question to ask someone from those communities, but I do think that that is a key battleground for Enbridge and for TC Energy or any of these companies. Like you just see more and more energy being poured into the response that they see from Indigenous communities. And I should go in the next few minutes, but there's one example that came out in my reporting recently, which I think was like kind of revealing to show what these what these companies are really about, and what this intensity of resources being put into Indigenous communities, where that really comes from, or where one place it may come from. So I was able to review some documents, some internal Enbridge documents that described this initiative they have that's called, it goes by the acronym ODOT. So it's Opposition Driven Operational Threats. And it's a tracking system to identify threats to Enbridge's business. And so threats is defined very broadly. It's basically like anything that could negatively impact the company, whether that's like an oil spill or property damage, but also reputational damage. And I guess what I saw in that material was the company repeatedly returning to Indigenous-led groups and Indigenous spaces as threat areas or threat actors. And so one example, so they were certainly looking at activists and people that were engaged in direct action indigenous-led groups that were engaged in direct action against the pipeline, but they also had this like mapping system where they were coming up with a score to identify how much of a threat there was to the company in any given area. So one of the items that they rated, that they gave a number to, was indigenous opposition. And so, you know, like lo and behold, it was often reservations that were showing up as red on these maps. So, and these were reservations where there were communities that, you know, had some power over agreeing to Enbridge running its pipelines. And I don't know, I think that, you know, like something like indigenous opposition that could have been captured in a heading that was like political opposition. It was, you know, it's a very specific concern that this company had and that they were using to look for threats. And so we don't know how, you know, after a company like after Enbridge identified an area as threat area or a group as a threat actor, we don't know exactly what they did with that information. But, you know, we see all this investment in some of these communities and, you know, some of the tactics that you're describing that can be so divisive. And I think this suggests that some of that begins with the idea of these people as a threat to the business. And, you know, again, coming back to this idea of counterinsurgency, you don't just see a threat and like bomb it or like send the police in. Like a lot more of what Enbridge is doing is, and some of these companies are doing, are going in and really changing the conditions on the ground and the way people are thinking about this on the ground. And yeah, seeding really impactful divisions. Yeah,
that's I guess all in all, why have an enemy when you could have a friend? It's much more productive for them. Yeah, sorry, I know that you're you have to go, but just before that, I just want to ask if there's any like articles or works of yours that that we can look forward to in the kind of upcoming, you know, near future. And also maybe where people can find you if they'd like to check out some of your work for the Intercept or elsewhere.
Yeah. We have a big project, a big mapping project that's not related to pipelines that we're publishing the next couple of weeks. I can't say more than that, but I'm excited to do it. Related to this, I mean, so there's two different series that we've talked about: policing the pipeline and oil and water, that you can find both of them on the Intercept's website. And the other thing that I'm working on that's kind of relevant to what we've been talking about is we have been fighting in court in North Dakota for something like 16,000 documents, internal energy transfer, or I guess Tiger Swan documents related to Standing Rock. You know, they're public records that were turned over to the Public Security Board and or the Private Security Board, and Energy Transfer had been fighting to keep them from landing in the public record. So we've had some like favorable court decisions lately, and we're hoping that those documents will land soon and tell us more about exactly what Energy Transfer was up to as it confronted Indigenous opposition in the Dakotas. So yeah, but yeah, you can find me. I've got an author page at the Intercept, Alleen Brown, and then I'm on Twitter. What's my Twitter? I guess my Twitter handle is Alleen Brown. Yeah, at Alleen Brown. So there you go.
Okay, awesome. Alleen Brown, thank you so much for your work, for coming on the show, for speaking to us. And yeah, really look forward to seeing these new projects and to see these two series as well just evolve and grow. I mean, I wish they didn't, but but if
Yeah.
they are, we might as well have you on the ground to report on it for us.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for what you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me.